It started with a necklace. Rachel and I had been married for 6 years, together for 8. I used to think we had one of those relationships people envied. A house full of love and laughter, Friday night dates, weekend hikes, and silly inside jokes that didn't make sense to anyone but us. But that image of us started to crack one late Tuesday night. I just finished a brutal day at work. Sales reports, pushy clients, endless emails. It was after 11 p.m. by the time I finally made it home. Driving past our quiet cul-de-sac, I noticed a yellow taxi pulling up outside our house. It wasn't strange for Rachel to take a cab. Her company had late meetings sometimes, and she hated driving at night. But as the taxi door opened, she stepped out, and so did a man. He was tall, with dark hair slicked back and a blazer slung over his shoulder. The two of them lingered by the curb, laughing softly. Rachel looked different somehow, like she was glowing, but not in the way I'd ever seen before. Then, the hug. It wasn't a friendly pat on the back kind of hug. No, this was lingering, intimate. His hands slid down her back in a way that made my stomach twist. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. They finally broke apart, and she walked toward the house. I pulled into the driveway a minute later, heart pounding. She didn't seem surprised to see me. "Oh, hey, babe," she said, her voice too cheerful, too casual. She was still wearing that fitted gray pencil skirt I loved. But now there was something new. A dainty gold necklace with a small sapphire pendant resting against her collarbone. "Late night at work?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Yeah," she said, brushing past me. "We had some project deadlines. Oh, by the way, this is from the office. A little gift for the team's hard work." She gestured at the necklace. "Isn't it cute?" I nodded, though the unease in my gut hadn't faded. "Who was that guy? Looked like you two were close." She laughed lightly, waving me off. "That's Otis, a colleague. He's harmless. The taxi dropped us both off since we live nearby. Saves money, you know?" Her answer should have put me at ease, but it didn't. Something about the way she brushed me off felt rehearsed. I didn't press her then, but later that night, as she was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel's phone on the nightstand, lighting up with a message preview. "Otis, let's go to my house tomorrow." Last night was unforgettable. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. This was the moment it all began to unravel. The message on Rachel's phone stayed burned into my brain all night. "Let's go to my house tomorrow." Last night was unforgettable. I barely slept, replaying the events of the evening in my mind. The hug outside the cab, the necklace, her casual dismissal of my questions. And now this. Every little detail felt like another piece of a puzzle I didn't want to solve, but I couldn't stop myself. Rachel, meanwhile, slept soundly beside me, completely unbothered. Watching her drift off like she didn't have a care in the world made my stomach churn. The next morning, I made my move. "Not feeling well today," I said casually as she grabbed her coffee. "I think I'll stay home and rest." Rachel barely looked at me as she adjusted her blouse in the mirror. "Okay, babe. Hope you feel better," she said, planting a quick kiss on my cheek. As she headed out the door, I stood there, watching her leave like I always did. But this time, I wasn't wishing her a good day. I was waiting for her to be out of sight so I could start mine. 12:30 p.m. Rachel's office building was sleek and modern, all glass and steel. I parked across the street, far enough to stay out of sight, but close enough to watch the entrance. My stomach was a knot of nerves and adrenaline. The hours ticked by slowly. A couple of times, I second-guessed myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the message had an innocent explanation. But then, at 3:45, the office doors swung open. Rachel stepped out, her smile bright. And walking beside her, looking far too comfortable, was Otis. He was just as I remembered, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of effortless confidence that set my teeth on edge. He held open the door to a sleek white Lexus parked nearby, and Rachel slid inside without hesitation. I followed at a distance, heart pounding. 4:15 p.m. They pulled into the driveway of a house that made my chest tighten with rage. It wasn't some dingy bachelor pad or rundown rental. No, Otis's house was perfect. It sat at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street, its clean white facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. The lawn was perfectly manicured, bordered by colorful flower beds. Even the porch had a welcoming charm, with rocking chairs and a neatly coiled hose by the steps. Rachel stepped out of the car, laughing at something Otis said. She didn't even glance around as she followed him to the front door, like she'd been there 100 times before. I parked down the block, trying to steady my breathing. My grip tightened on my phone as I snapped a picture of the house and her walking inside. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was proof. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I couldn't wait any longer. I got out of the car, my anger boiling over with every step up that pristine driveway. I knocked firmly on the door. Footsteps approached, and then Otis opened the door. He looked surprised but not rattled, like someone who wasn't used to being caught off guard. "Can I help you?" Behind him, Rachel appeared. Her hair was a little mussed, her blouse slightly wrinkled. Her expression shifted in an instant, from shock to guilt to something almost defiant. "Do you want to explain something?" I asked, my voice low and tight. Otis raised an eyebrow, stepping aside slightly. "Ethan, right? Rachel's mentioned you." "Oh, has she?" I snapped, my eyes fixed on Rachel. "What exactly did she say? That I'm her husband? That she's supposed to be at work?" Rachel stepped forward, her voice unnervingly calm. "Ethan, you're overreacting. Otis and I were just working on a project?" I interrupted, my anger boiling over. "Because that message on your phone last night didn't sound like work. Rachel, should I read it back to you?" Her face paled, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Otis, ever the picture of composure, tried to diffuse the situation. "I think we should all just take a breath here. This isn't what it looks like." "Shut up," I growled, my glare enough to make him step back slightly. "This isn't about you." "Not yet." Rachel's calm facade began to crack. "Ethan, listen to me. It's not. Don't lie to me." My voice was cold now, each word cutting through the tense silence. "You want to explain the necklace? The message? Or how you've been sneaking off to his house?" She stared at me, her jaw tightening, and for the first time, I saw a flash of anger in her eyes. "Fine," she said finally, crossing her arms. "You want the truth? You're suffocating, Ethan. Always watching, always questioning." I needed a break. Otis is a friend, someone I can talk to without feeling judged. My stomach twisted at her audacity. "A friend? That's the excuse you're going with? Do all your friends call last night unforgettable?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time, she was at a loss for words. I stepped back, the anger giving way to a cold clarity. "Pack your things, Rachel. You're not coming back to my house." I didn't wait for her response. As I walked back to my car, I heard her call after me, her voice breaking. But I didn't turn around. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. When I got home, the house felt different. It wasn't the space I had once thought of as a sanctuary. Every piece of furniture, every picture frame on the wall, felt tainted. The laughter, the good times. It all seemed fake now, overshadowed by what I'd just witnessed. I didn't waste time. Rachel wasn't going to set foot in this house again. Not if I could help it. I went straight to the bedroom, yanking open her drawers with more force than necessary. Her clothes, her jewelry, the little knickknacks she collected from trips, everything went into boxes without a second thought. It wasn't about being neat or thoughtful. It was about erasing her from this space, from my life. By the time I was halfway through the closet, my hands were trembling, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer weight of it all. The betrayal, the humiliation, the sheer audacity of her lies. My mind replayed the confrontation at Otis's house over and over, her calm tone, the way she had tried to paint me as the problem. The door opened, and Rachel's voice called out, too casual for the situation. "Ethan, can we talk?" I didn't answer. I stayed in the bedroom, methodically folding her clothes into a box. She appeared in the doorway, her face puffy and red. "Ethan," she said softly, like I was the one she needed to comfort. "I know how this looks, but—" I cut her off without looking at her. "Your stuff is in boxes. You can take it and go." Her voice sharpened. You're not even going to let me explain? I finally turned to face her, and for a moment, the sight of her stunned me. She looked small, vulnerable, but I wasn't falling for it. Explain what? I snapped. How you lied to my face. How you've been sneaking off with Otis for God knows how long. Or maybe you want to explain the unforgettable night you two had. Go ahead, Rachel. I'd love to hear it. She flinched at my tone, but then her face hardened. You're being ridiculous, she said. Nothing happened. Otis is just a friend. We had dinner. We talked about work. That's it. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You know what's funny? If you had told me that last night, I might have believed you. But not now. Not after the message. Not after seeing you walk into his house like you belonged there. Her jaw tightened, and for a second, I saw something flash in her eyes. Anger, maybe even defiance. Fine, she snapped. You want to think the worst? Go ahead. But you're not perfect, Ethan. You're controlling, you're paranoid, and honestly, I'm not even sure why I stayed this long. The words hit like a slap. Not because they were true, but because she was trying to twist this, to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. I stepped closer, my voice low and dangerous. You stayed because you didn't have the guts to leave. Because it's easier to lie and cheat than to be honest. But don't worry, Rachel. I'm making this easy for you now. I gestured to the boxes. Take your stuff and get out. Or don't. Either way, you're done here. She stared at me, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Finally, she turned on her heel and walked out. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel like home. Not yet. I sat on the couch, staring at the neatly packed boxes stacked by the front door. I should have felt relieved, even triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the photos I'd taken of her messages and the pictures of Otis's house. I wasn't done yet. This wasn't just about kicking her out. It was about making sure she couldn't lie her way out of this. Tomorrow, I'd call a lawyer. And I wasn't holding back. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My body was stiff from the tension, and my mind raced with fragments of the day before. Rachel's face, her excuses, the way she had tried to spin her betrayal into something I caused. But today wasn't about emotions. It was about action. After a quick breakfast, if you could call black coffee and half a piece of toast breakfast, I made the call. Ethan McAllister, I said when the receptionist answered. I need to schedule an appointment to discuss filing for divorce. Helen Keller, ironic name for a divorce lawyer, I know, had an office that screamed efficiency. Sleek gray furniture, glass-top desk, certificates from Harvard and Yale framed neatly on the wall. She greeted me with a firm handshake, her sharp eyes sizing me up like she already knew my story. Tell me everything, she said, settling into her chair. And I did. I laid it all out. Rachel's suspicious behavior, the late-night text from Otis, the confrontation at his house, the lies she tried to sell me afterward. I handed her my phone, showing her the screenshots of the messages and the photos of Rachel walking into Otis's house. Helen scrolled through them silently, nodding occasionally. This is good, she said finally, setting the phone down. You have tangible evidence. It's rare for a client to come in this prepared. Will it help? I asked. She gave me a small, confident smile. Absolutely. Especially if she tries to claim this was just a misunderstanding. This kind of documentation will make her excuses fall apart in court. We spent the next hour going over the details, finances, assets, how the house would be divided. Rachel and I didn't have kids, thank God, so at least that part would be simple. But Helen warned me to brace for a fight. Women like her, she said, don't admit defeat easily. She'll push back, try to twist things in her favor. But with what you've shown me, I'm confident we can make this as painless as possible, for you, anyway. I walked out of her office feeling steadier than I had in days. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now it had a purpose. When I got home, Rachel's car was parked in the driveway. My chest tightened as I opened the door, half expecting her to launch into another round of gaslighting. But the house was quiet. Her boxes were gone. I found a note on the kitchen counter, written in her familiar loopy handwriting. Ethan, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I'm sorry for hurting you, but I wish you'd let me explain. This isn't how I wanted things to end. I'll be staying with a friend for now. Please don't do anything rash. Rachel. I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. The time for explanations had passed. That evening, I called our mutual friends to let them know what was happening. I wasn't going to let Rachel control the narrative. I started with Bryce and Jessica, a couple we'd been close to for years. Bryce picked up on the second ring. Hey man, he said. What's up? Rachel and I are divorcing, I said bluntly. She's been cheating on me with some guy from her work. There was a long pause. What? Bryce finally said. Are you serious? Dead serious. I caught her with him yesterday. It's over. Jessica must have been listening in because I heard her voice in the background, sharp and angry. I knew it. I knew she was acting weird at dinner last month. By the time I hung up, I felt lighter, like I'd taken the first real step toward reclaiming my life. I sat on the couch, scrolling through Facebook. Rachel hadn't updated her status or posted anything incriminating, but I wasn't surprised. She'd want to keep this quiet for as long as possible, hoping to salvage her reputation. I wasn't going to let that happen. Tomorrow, I'd make sure everyone knew the truth. The next morning, I decided it was time to pull the mask off Rachel's perfect little facade. I wasn't going to sit around and let her control the narrative, whispering lies to our friends or painting herself as the victim. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat down at my desk, my phone buzzing with unread messages from friends I'd started reaching out to the night before. Most were supportive, some shocked, a few downright livid. Bryce had even texted me. You okay, man? Let me know if you need anything. Jess is ready to rip Rachel a new one. It felt good to know people had my back, but I wasn't just going to rely on whispered conversations. I opened Facebook and started typing. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who betray you the worst. Yesterday, I confronted my wife, Rachel, about her affair with one of her coworkers. She lied, tried to manipulate me, and made me feel like I was crazy for even questioning her. But I have the evidence. I'm not posting this to air dirty laundry. I'm posting this because I refuse to let her play the victim. To those of you who know us, I'm sorry you're hearing about it this way, but the truth needed to come out. I hit post. Within minutes, the notifications started rolling in. By midday, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Comments, messages, even phone calls. Everyone had something to say. Some were horrified. I can't believe she'd do this to you, Ethan. You're such a good guy. Others were more blunt. Knew she was shady. She's been acting off for months. And then there were the messages from people who had apparently seen Rachel and Otis together before. One from an acquaintance, Caitlin, hit me the hardest. Ethan, I didn't know if I should say anything, but I saw Rachel with Otis at that little cafe on Pine Street a few weeks ago. They looked close. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. It was infuriating, knowing how many people had probably seen the cracks in our marriage long before I had. Rachel called. I stared at her name flashing on the screen, my jaw tightening. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but another part wanted to hear what excuse she was going to peddle this time. I answered, What do you want, Rachel? Ethan. Her voice was shaky, a mix of anger and desperation. What the hell are you doing? I saw your post. Do you know how humiliating that is? Humiliating? I said, my voice dripping with venom. You mean like finding out your wife has been sneaking around with another man? Or maybe walking into his house and seeing her standing there, lying to my face? There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. I told you, it wasn't what it looked like. And I told you I wasn't falling for your bullshit anymore. Her voice rose, defensive now. Do you think this makes you look good? Posting our personal business online? You're just making this worse for both of us. No, Rachel. You made this worse when you decided to cheat and then lie about it. This is me taking control of my life back. The line went silent for a moment, and then she said quietly, I didn't think you'd be this cruel. Cruel? I laughed bitterly. Cruel is stringing someone along while you sneak around behind their back. Don't call me again unless it's to talk about the divorce. I hung up before she could respond. That evening, Bryce and Jessica came over with pizza and beer. It felt good to be around people who cared, who didn't hesitate to let me vent or sit in silence when I needed it. You did the right thing, Jessica said, her voice firm. People like Rachel rely on silence. They think they can do whatever they want as long as no one talks about it. You blew that up for her. Bryce nodded. Yeah, man. She's probably losing her mind right now, and honestly, she deserves it. I wasn't sure if I felt better or worse knowing Rachel was probably spiraling. A part of me wanted her to suffer, to feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. But another part just wanted it all to be over. Before bed, I scrolled through the comments on my post one more time. The support was overwhelming, but there were a few people defending Rachel, saying things like, "There's always two sides to every story." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was out there now, and no amount of spin could change that. By the time I woke up the next morning, my phone was flooded with even more messages. Rachel must have seen the post blow up because several of the comments were from mutual acquaintances trying to smooth things over or act like they weren't taking sides. "Hey, Ethan, I'm so sorry this happened. Rachel says there's a misunderstanding. Maybe you two can talk it out?" Rachel reached out to me. She's saying Otis is just a coworker and this has all been blown out of proportion. Are you sure you're not overreacting? I ignored them all. The people worth keeping in my life didn't need me to defend myself. Helen called to give me an update. "I've filed the preliminary paperwork," she said. "Rachel will be served by the end of the week. I've also reached out to Otis's HR department. If this relationship started at work, we might be able to use that as leverage during negotiations. Companies don't take kindly to affairs between employees." Hearing her talk about leverage made me feel like I had a lifeline. Rachel might be trying to spin her story to everyone else, but legally, she wouldn't have the upper hand. "You're doing great, Ethan," Helen said. "Keep documenting everything. If Rachel tries anything, I need to know." "Will do," I replied, feeling a renewed sense of control. I spent the afternoon cleaning out the house, trying to clear the lingering reminders of Rachel's presence. Her books, her knickknacks, the throw pillows she'd insisted on buying, they all went into boxes. It was cathartic in a way, like I was reclaiming my space. As I packed, I found our old wedding album buried under a stack of photo books. For a moment, I hesitated, flipping it open to the first page. There we were, Rachel in her flowing white gown, me in my slightly too tight tuxedo. Her smile was radiant, her eyes bright. I remembered how I'd felt that day, nervous but so certain I'd made the right choice. I closed the album and shoved it into the box without a second glance. The knock at the door startled me. When I opened it, I was greeted by someone I didn't expect. Otis. He looked different out of his polished office attire, just jeans and a fitted t-shirt, but the smugness in his expression hadn't changed. "Ethan," he said, his tone far too casual for my liking. "Can we talk?" My grip on the door tightened. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Look, I know things are tense, but I didn't come to start anything. I just wanted to clear the air." I laughed bitterly. "Clear the air? You mean explain why you've been screwing my wife behind my back?" Otis raised his hands defensively. "It's not like that. Rachel and she told me things weren't great between you two. I didn't mean for anything to happen, but—" "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't stand there and try to play the victim. You knew she was married. You knew what you were doing." He sighed, looking down at his feet. "I'm not proud of it, okay? But it's not like Rachel's blameless here. I don't care," I said coldly. "You're not going to make this about her. Or me. You made your choices, Otis. Now get the hell off my property before I call the cops." He hesitated for a moment, like he wanted to say more, but I stepped forward, my glare enough to send him back to his car. I called Helen immediately after Otis left. "Smart move not letting him inside," she said when I explained what happened. "The last thing you need is for him to spin some story about how you threatened him." "Did you record the conversation?" "No," I admitted. "I didn't think about it." "Start doing that," she advised. "Every interaction with Rachel or Otis needs to be documented. Trust me, it'll save you a lot of headaches later." That night, I went through Rachel's financial records. We'd always shared accounts, but lately, she'd been insisting on keeping a separate credit card for emergencies. I logged into the account, my stomach sinking as I scrolled through the charges. Dinner at expensive restaurants, spa days, jewelry stores, all things she'd never mentioned to me. One charge stood out, a weekend stay at a luxury hotel in the city. The date was burned into my mind. It was the same weekend she told me she was on a work retreat. I saved screenshots of everything, adding them to the growing folder of evidence. As I lay in bed that night, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. The lies, the betrayal, the sheer audacity of Otis showing up at my door. It was enough to make anyone break. But I wasn't going to break. If Rachel wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure she regretted it. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Helen. Attached were the finalized divorce documents, ready to be served to Rachel. Her message was concise. Let me know when you're ready to proceed. Once she's served, there's no turning back. Helen. I stared at the email for a long time. This was the point of no return. The line that, once crossed, would set everything into motion. But as much as I hated what was happening, there was no hesitation in me. Rachel had made her choices, and now I was making mine. I replied immediately. Go ahead. It was a quiet afternoon at home until my phone buzzed with a notification. Rachel's name popped up, her text as audacious as ever. Can we talk? I think we owe it to each other to handle this maturely. Maturely. The word made my blood boil. This was coming from the same woman who'd spent weeks lying to my face, sneaking around with Otis, and using every manipulative trick in the book to gaslight me. I didn't respond. By mid-afternoon, I got a call from Bryce. He'd been keeping an ear to the ground among our mutual friends and had more updates on Rachel's attempts to spin the situation. Apparently, she's telling people you've been cold and distant for months, Bryce said. She's trying to play it off like she had no choice but to seek comfort elsewhere. I clenched my teeth, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. Let her spin her lies, I said. It won't matter once the documents are served. Bryce hesitated, then added, Jess says Rachel called her yesterday, trying to cry on her shoulder. Didn't go well? That made me pause. What happened? She told Rachel exactly what she thought of her, Bryce said with a chuckle. Said she's got no sympathy for someone who destroys their marriage and then plays the victim. Rachel hung up on her. For the first time all day, I cracked a smile. Helen called me with an update. The papers were served this afternoon, she said. Expect Rachel to reach out. It's common for people in her position to try and negotiate or guilt you into backing off. Sure enough, Rachel called an hour later. I didn't pick up. She called again, then sent a barrage of texts. Ethan, we need to talk. Please, this is all a misunderstanding. I can't believe you're doing this. After everything we've been through, you're just going to throw it all away? I'll fight you on this if I have to. I let the messages pile up, each one more desperate than the last. Let her stew. The quiet evening was interrupted by a knock at the door. My heart sank, half expecting to find Rachel standing on the porch, but it wasn't her. It was Olivia, one of Rachel's oldest friends. We hadn't spoken much since everything started, but Olivia had always been the type to call things like she saw them. She stood there, arms crossed, her expression a mix of anger and disappointment. Can I come in? She asked. I nodded, stepping aside. She wasted no time. What the hell happened, Ethan? I've been hearing bits and pieces, but I want to know the truth. So, I told her. I laid it all out, the messages, the confrontation at Otis's house, the lies Rachel had fed me, and the way she tried to twist the story to make herself look innocent. When I was done, Olivia shook her head, her jaw tight. I knew something was off, she said. Rachel's been weird for months, dodging questions, acting like she had some big secret. But I didn't think she'd sink this low. Her words were validating, but they also stung. Olivia had known Rachel since college. They'd been inseparable for years. If even she was disgusted, it told me how far Rachel had fallen. What's she been saying to you? I asked. Olivia sighed. That you're controlling, paranoid, that she felt trapped. The same crap she's probably telling everyone else. But don't worry, I'm not buying it. And neither are most of the people who actually know you. Her loyalty meant more than I could say, but all I managed was a quiet, thanks, Olivia. She nodded, her gaze steady. You don't deserve this, Ethan. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. Before going to bed, I scrolled through Rachel's texts again. The anger I'd felt earlier was starting to shift, replaced by a strange, hollow sadness. She'd been my wife, my partner, someone I thought I could trust with everything. And now, she was just another stranger trying to hurt me. But this wasn't the end. Rachel had underestimated me. She thought she could twist the story, spin her lies, and walk away unscathed. But with Helen, my friends, and the growing pile of evidence on my side, I knew better. This was only the beginning. The day after Rachel was served, things escalated quickly. It started with a series of texts from her, long-winded, emotionally charged rants. At first, she was pleading, "Ethan, please, can we just talk? You're blowing this way out of proportion. I didn't do anything wrong." But when I didn't respond, her tone shifted to anger. "You're unbelievable. I can't believe you'd humiliate me like this. I should have left you years ago." It was the same pattern I'd seen in the last few weeks: gaslighting, guilt-tripping, and trying to make me feel like the bad guy. But I wasn't biting. Helen called to let me know Rachel had officially retained her own lawyer. "She's trying to claim irreconcilable differences," Helen said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "But don't worry. With the evidence we've gathered, she's not going to walk away with much." That was the plan all along. I didn't just want to end this marriage. I wanted to make sure Rachel couldn't manipulate the situation to her advantage. She'd already taken enough from me. That afternoon, I got a call from Bryce. "Hey man, you need to check Rachel's Instagram," he said, his voice tense. I opened the app and pulled up her profile. My stomach twisted when I saw her latest post, a picture of her sitting on a balcony, wine glass in hand, captioned, "Sometimes, you have to walk away from toxic people to find your happiness." The comments were a mix of sympathy and praise. "You're so strong, Rachel. You deserve so much better." It was infuriating. She was already trying to spin this as if I had been the problem, as if she hadn't been sneaking around with Otis for months. I screenshotted the post and sent it to Helen. Rachel called again. This time, I picked up. "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked, my tone flat. "I want to understand why you're doing this," she said, her voice breaking. "Why are you trying to destroy me?" "Destroy you?" I laughed bitterly. "Rachel, you destroyed us the moment you decided to cheat and lie about it. Everything that's happening now is a consequence of your actions, not mine." Her tone hardened. "So that's it? You're just going to make me out to be the bad guy and take everything?" "I'm not making you out to be anything," I said. "You did that all on your own." The line went silent for a moment before she hung up. That night, I met with Bryce and Jessica again. They'd been my rocks through this whole ordeal, always willing to lend an ear or offer advice. "She's losing it," Jessica said, scrolling through her phone. "Every post she makes is more dramatic than the last. It's like she's trying to win sympathy points." "Let her," Bryce said, shrugging. "Anyone who actually knows the truth isn't going to fall for it." Jessica looked at me, her expression serious. "Are you okay? Really?" I hesitated, not sure how to answer. "I'm better than I was," I admitted. "But it still feels surreal, you know? Like, how did we get here?" Jessica nodded, her voice soft. "I get it. But you're doing the right thing, Ethan. She's shown you who she really is. Now it's just about making sure she doesn't take anything more from you." Before bed, I pulled up the growing file of evidence I'd collected. The screenshots of Rachel's messages with Otis, the receipts from her secret credit card, and the photos of her walking into his house. Each piece was a reminder of why I was doing this. The anger I'd felt in the beginning had started to fade, replaced by something colder, sharper. Rachel wanted to play dirty, but I wasn't the same naive husband she thought she could manipulate. I wasn't just ending this marriage. I was making sure she paid for what she'd done. And I wasn't done yet. The day of the mediation arrived sooner than I expected. Rachel's lawyer had pushed for a sit-down to negotiate terms, likely assuming I'd cave under pressure. But with Helen by my side and a mountain of evidence backing me up, I wasn't going to budge. The conference room at Helen's office was cold and sterile, with a long glass table dividing the two sides. Rachel sat across from me, her hair perfectly styled, wearing the kind of neutral outfit that screamed, "Take me seriously." but she couldn't meet my eyes. Next to her was her lawyer, a middle-aged man with slicked back hair and an overly confident smile. Helen and I sat opposite them, our folders neatly stacked, phones ready with digital evidence at a moment's notice. The mediator began with pleasantries, but I barely heard him. My focus was on Rachel. She looked different, smaller, somehow. Not physically, but emotionally, like the weight of everything was finally catching up to her. "Let's begin with the division of assets," the mediator said. Her lawyer launched into a rehearsed spiel about how Rachel had contributed to our household, both financially and emotionally, and deserved a fair portion of everything we built together. Helen leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "My client has provided extensive documentation showing that he covered the majority of the household expenses, including the mortgage, utilities, and maintenance. Additionally, we have evidence of Rachel's extramarital affair, which directly undermines her claims to equitable division." Helen opened the folder in front of her and slid a stack of printed screenshots across the table. Rachel's lawyer picked them up, his smug expression faltering as he flipped through the pages. "And just to be thorough," Helen continued, "we also have evidence of significant personal expenditures made by Rachel during the course of her affair, using funds from a separate credit account she concealed from my client." She handed over another folder, photos of receipts, credit card statements, and screenshots of Rachel's hotel bookings. Rachel's lawyer cleared his throat. "We weren't aware of this." "I'm sure you weren't," Helen replied smoothly. Rachel finally spoke, her voice shaky. "Ethan, this doesn't have to be ugly. Can't we just split things fairly and move on?" I stared at her, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Fairly?" I said, my voice low. "After everything you've done? After you lied, cheated, and tried to paint me as the bad guy? No, Rachel. Fair isn't an option anymore." By the time the mediation ended, Rachel's lawyer looked like he'd been through a war. Helen had systematically dismantled every argument they tried to make, presenting our evidence with an almost surgical precision. The final terms were clear. I kept the house, the majority of our joint savings, and the car. Rachel walked away with little more than her personal belongings and the weight of her own mistakes. As we left the conference room, Rachel called after me. "Ethan, wait." I stopped but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know you don't believe me, but I am." For a moment, I considered responding, but what was the point? Her apology, whether genuine or not, couldn't undo the damage she'd done. I walked away without a word. That evening, I met up with Bryce and Jessica to celebrate. We ordered pizza, opened a few beers, and sat on their back porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. "To freedom," Bryce said, raising his bottle. "To moving on," I replied, clinking mine against his. Jessica smiled. "You've been through hell, Ethan, but you came out stronger. Don't forget that." For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The divorce wasn't just an ending. It was a new beginning. 1 year later, life after Rachel was better than I could have imagined. I sold the house we'd shared and moved into a smaller, more modern place across town. It was mine, free of the memories that had once haunted me. I threw myself into work, earning a promotion that came with a pay bump and a lot of respect from my colleagues. I also started running again, a hobby I'd let fall by the wayside during the last years of my marriage. Every now and then, I'd hear about Rachel, how she was struggling to keep up appearances, how her relationship with Otis had fizzled out as quickly as it started. But those were just distant echoes of a life I'd left behind. One afternoon, while I was out for a run, I passed a couple walking hand in hand. They laughed, their energy infectious, and I realized something. I wasn't bitter anymore. I'd survived the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, and come out the other side stronger, more self-assured. I wasn't looking for a new relationship, but for the first time, I felt open to the possibility. As I turned the corner toward home, the sun breaking through the clouds above, I smiled. Rachel's betrayal hadn't broken me. It had freed me. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.